You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It's episode number 93 of season 2. Are the Cubs desperate? Don't forget to listen, download, review. Most importantly, subscribe to our podcast. Follow us on the socials, Fly the W670 on Twitter, Instagram. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, and you can email us, flythew670 at gmail.com. Crawly, happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend.
Yeah, I went down to, there's a tiny little memorabilia shop. It's in the tiniest little place. It's a town called Hoopeston, Illinois. It's past Bourbonnais, kind of maybe like half hour, 45 minutes from Champaign. But I drove down there to get some memorabilia signed. Sarge, Gary Matthews, and Bobby D were in the house.
Sarge and Bobby D were there. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I went down. I've gotten to hang out with those guys in the past, and they're just superhuman beings. And I felt like it was time for a little bit of a road trip. So I went down there and got to see that and get some stuff signed. So it's a great little, memorabilia shop. And the guy and the owner gets, owner Bob gets like tons of great guys down there, but it's just like, could you do it a little bit closer? Could you move the store? Maybe just get to Kankakee at least. You know what I mean? It's a haul.
It's a haul, yeah.
But it's
that's pretty cool. Good for you. I mean, so what does so since you're not into the NFL per se, what does a Crawly listen to on a 6-hour round trip drive or 5-hour round trip drive?
I listen to music. I listen to baseball podcasts, obviously Fly the W, but we have Matt Spiegel coming on in the second segment. So whatever can kind of just tickles my fancy as far as just, Cubs podcasts. I'm always kind of just trying to see what's going on and what people are hearing and what's going, for me, baseball is just 24/7, 365 days a week. So, and then you throw a little bit of music, some Sirius XM and some tunes or whatever. And I'll listen to whatever.
Well, the winter meetings officially kicked off in Nashville, Tennessee on Sunday. So, Crawly, as we like to say, let the games begin.
Yep, we got our first trade of the winter meetings as the Braves and Mariners made a deal. The Braves got outfielder Jared Kelenic and pitcher Marco Gonzalez and first base Evan White. And the Mariners get pitchers Cole Phillips and Jackson Cower. But as far as the big free agents and trade targets, only Aaron Nola and Sonny Gray are off the board. So, I mean, it's Dustin, we're kind of in this really weird point where it's really been all about the Shohei show. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we're looking at this and we're saying to ourselves, okay, once that first domino falls, all the rest will, but it's not until Shohei makes a decision. Odyssey baseball insider and friend of the pod, Bob Nightingale, wrote in his winter meeting preview that Shohei Ohtani will not be signing this week, but anticipates he signs before Christmas. So we may have to wait a couple of weeks before finding out if he becomes a Chicago Cub. But Dustin, he has the Cubs, the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, and the Giants as the finalists, as some teams are starting to drop out and turn their attention elsewhere. I saw now that the Braves seem to be in on Ohtani. Who knows how they're going to pull that off?
Come on, the Braves. I mean, really? I mean, the rich keep getting richer. I mean, some people are saying that they really got quite a steal in this trade they made with the Mariners.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're trying to see what's happening here, but with Ohtani getting, they're still saying now in the 500 and 600, regardless of the fact that he won't be pitching, $500 to $600 million. So it's just I don't think we've ever seen a free agent quite like this. We've seen some, Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, and we've seen a couple of guys, but this is just beyond anything I've ever experienced. So. Bob Nightingale was talking in his article preview, and he said, I think the most fascinating part of these winter meetings, he's talking to a GM here, is to see if anyone will bite on any of these one-year guys like Soto, Tyler Glasnow, Corbin Burns. There's not a Mookie Betts here. What he meant is the Dodgers didn't give up anything to sign Betts, and were able to sign him to an extension. And so what this GM is saying is that, when you talk about Glasnow or Soto or Burns, these guys aren't signing an extension. So you are giving up these guys for 1 year. And what the GM said is you got to be pretty desperate or even stupid to give up a ton for one of these guys.
Yeah, I saw that the Yankees supposedly and the Padres had hit a snag on the boatload that they wanted in regards to Soto for just that 1 year. So I mean, this is the rumor mill is flying and the hot stove is churning.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Nightingale goes on to list what he called the most desperate teams, aka where we got this title from. And I don't see it as being desperate, but these are teams that are clearly going for it. These are the guys, these are the teams when you talk about, like, say, the World Series of poker, right? And you get to the final table. Like, this is the final table and they're all staring at each other, and you're looking at the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, the Cubs. And he also added the Padres, but for different reasons. And that's because of, the need to slash payroll and the kind of financial mess that they're in right now. But, when he looks at these teams, and the reason he calls the Yankees desperate is you saw the,
well, they can't have another year like they had last year. That's just not how they do business.
No. And Cashman seems like a little bit like he's on tilt. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The Dodgers, it seems, the Dodgers were another one of those teams, I think, that really thought that they were going to land Ohtani in 17. And, it really seems like they kind of planned for years waiting for him to kind of become a free agent again. So they're desperate to get him. The Giants, as far as the Giants, always the bridesmaid, right? They just keep getting turned down by everybody. They got to do something. And I'm sure the fans are getting frustrated there.
They swung and missed. Yeah, they swung and missed all offseason last year.
And they missed on Harper when they were going for Bryce Harper. They missed on Aaron Judge. They missed on the Carlos Correa thing. I mean, it worked out for them, but that still was a disappointment when the fan base was all fired up. And then the Blue Jays are I think, a little bit of a step ahead of the Cubs, where they have their core guys, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Vladito, all these guys. And you only got them for 2 more years before they're going to start costing you a lot more money. So they have to do something if they're going to make that final push. And
it makes sense that it makes sense that they're in the conversation based on some of these younger guys. And it's either maybe move those younger guys or stick with those younger guys and actually go for it.
Right. And what Bob wrote about the Cubs is interesting. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. It said, quote, "You don't fire your beloved manager, steal manager Craig Counsell from your rival, pay him a record salary, shout from the Cubs Chicago rooftops that it's Ohtani or bust, and sit back and tell your fan base that at least you tried if you don't land him. It's not good enough. The Cubs have to go big and at least win the NL Central, or heads will roll in their front office too." Thoughts?
Well, I think the heads rolling in the front office, that's a little much. I think that's very blusterous from Mr. Nightingale. But I mean, all the rest of it makes all the sense in the world. That you don't run and get Craig Counsell to get. I am trying to think of a third tier guy, that we've talked about before, off the
Jorge
top of
Soler.
my head. Like Jorge Soler is your DH, Justin Turner as your new third baseman, and then bring back Candelario to play first base, and then just pick up some nameless pitcher.
It's got
that would not be good enough. That would be like strike 3 looking with the bases loaded.
Absolutely. And when the Cubs fired Ross and signed Counsell, Cub fans are just naturally going to think about Ricky Renteria and Joe Madden, that move after 2014. And you remember once they were able to get Madden, then they start landing in free agency and through trades. Dustin, it was in the winter meetings in 2014 that the Cubs signed perhaps their biggest free agent in franchise history, when they got John Lester to sign on the dotted line. And a few years later, the Cubs would be World Series champions. So, I mean, it feels like deja vu that, like I said, how often have you seen a manager that did a good job, not a great job, but a good job, and then all of a sudden gets, the carpet pulled under them? I mean, and this is Ross was a beloved figure here. So you have to do something. You have to have a marquee move. So, when you're talking
or
about
maybe Crawly, they're quietly working on Bellinger, right? They're acting like they're not. They're acting like they're moving on to, and maybe that's what's going on quietly somewhere.
There's so many possibilities. It makes your head spins. And so when Bob talks about Ohtani or bust, I mean, absolutely no doubt that, you'd love to get Shohei. But Dustin, I know especially you've been kind of looking at potentially getting, other guys. And if you're just only going to get Ohtani and then you can't put a supporting cast around him, remember Ohtani, who many people say is already a future Hall of Famer, has been playing the last, since 6-7 years with Mike Trout, who many consider the best player of this generation.
Mickey Mantle, I'm told Mickey Mantle.
Right. And no postseasons. And so when I was listening to the Mully and Haw show this morning, and Dustin, I was making sure that they were treating you nice and not talking about you on there. They were, when I was listening to it, they said, well, it's not your money if Tom Ricketts buys Shohei Ohtani. And I understand that mode of thinking, but if that prevents you from building the team around, well, then it's not, obviously it's not my money, but I also want to see, if you're telling me all we're getting Ohtani and nothing else, I don't know if the Cubs are good enough just on that alone.
Yeah, I don't think they are. If you're asking my opinion on that, the other part of this is, we've talked about like the Cubs being able to recoup money by signing Ohtani. Like Ohtani brings in $100 million, and again, I don't know exactly which way these revenue streams come, but one thing I did hear on the radio earlier today is that the Marquee Sports Network and their on-demand setup is not available in Japan. That could not go to them. So there's not, hundreds of thousands of Japanese baseball fans that are going to be paying the Marquee Sports Network $20 or $25 a month to watch Ohtani. That's just not how it works.
That's interesting. And we should get someone on there to talk to us about how that works, because, it's, I can sit there and through my MLB package, I get like the Lead'em League, the Dominican League baseball that I can watch and stuff like that. So I don't, if you're trying to grow,
maybe it's, you can get the MLB Network package, right? Or something, the MLB at bat app or something, but supposedly Marquee specifically on a single platform and a la carte option is not an option. So that's not like Marquee with the Cubs and the money goes straight to baseball. That's not happening.
Interesting. Well, even, whether it's Shohei or bust, we've been talking the last couple of weeks about different trade targets and free agent targets. And what I did is I kind of said to myself, all right, I'm going to put 3 tiers together. And when you take a look at this, it's the top free agents and the top trade targets. So I put them into 3 different tiers. And I think that you can, if you've ever done this on Twitter, they give you a certain amount of money and you can spend it on however you want, but you only have X amount of dollars. I look at this and I see the tiers, and I think the Cubs do have to either get what I call a tier 1 free agent or a tier 1 trade target, and then supplement that with a couple tier 2s and tier 3s. So I'm going to go through this list right here from what we were talking about. Obviously the tier 1 free agents. I'm going to go with these 3 right here. DH, Shohei Ohtani, clearly number 1. Another tier 1 free agent, starting pitcher, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who the buzz around him just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And then I had a tough one with this one, but I put starting pitcher Blake Snell up there only because he's the defending Cy Young. I know that, a lot of people are, may put Jordan Montgomery above there, but I'm not going to do that just based off of strong postseason. So I'm just going to go with Blake Snell and put him in that tier 1. And then when I looked at the tier 1 trade targets, you got Juan Soto, Dylan Cease, and Pete Alonso.
I'm surprised you got Dylan Cease that high.
I just from what I'm hearing off the buzz, I'm trying to be as realistic as possible about this. I would say that it seems to me like a lot of big market teams. Atlanta, I've heard in the mix for Dylan Cease. The Dodgers in the mix for Dylan Cease. So a lot of teams seem to really.
Crawly, let me know who aren't the Dodgers in on. Who aren't the Dodgers kicking the tires on? That would be a shorter list to share with the audience.
I honestly think that they're just looking at the top tier. Like when I'm saying tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I think they're looking at Shohei, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and Dylan Cease. Those are the 3 names I think that they are intent on getting, which would just be absolutely unreal. But that's what I'm kind of looking at right now. And so, you have to, in my opinion, you have to get one of those 6 names that I listed: Shohei, Yamamoto, Snell, Soto, Cease, or Alonso. I think that's really key right there. And then if you take a look at the tier 2 free agents, there's a lot of really good value to be had there. Jordan Montgomery, starting pitcher, third baseman Matt Chapman, and bringing back Cody Bellinger, who can play outfield and first base. I think that's the next level below as far as free agents. And then as far as the trade targets, Corbin Burns was somebody I was kind of flipping back and forth on Dylan Cease, but just because I keep hearing more about Cease and not sure if the Brewers are going to go trade Burns just yet, I put him in tier 2. I might have flipped those two. I put Alex Bregman and Tyler Glasnow. Some people put Tyler Glasnow ahead of Dylan Cease. I just get nervous about the injuries. You know what I mean? The injury history with him is just, and especially, he pitched a lot last year, more than he usually does. I can just see something. I would be much more cautious with Tyler Glasnow, but there's no doubt that the ability is up there.
Right. He's got the thing that the Cubs lack in their starting rotation, right? The swing and miss stuff.
Right. Both Corbin Burns and Glasnow does. We talked about
both. And Burns has the relationship, right?
Right. And we
the talked familiarity, I guess, maybe.
Yes. And we also talked about Bregman and the Bo Bichette, but I didn't put him in here, Bo Bichette, because to me, I just think Toronto's going for it. I don't think they're trading him, so I didn't really put him in there as a trade target. But I still think Alex Bregman is a guy that you could get and would be, I don't know what he's looking for, and it just seems like so much of the talk is surrounded around Shohei that like it kind of is like all these other guys are kind of in the background. You know what I mean? It's like when you look at like a record album and one guy's the focal point in the back, everybody's fuzzy. It kind of reminds me of that. Like, it's like Shohei, and his buddies behind him. And that's all these other players. Mm-hmm. For the tier 3 free agents, I put down Rhys Hoskins at first, Jorge Soler, DH, Shota Imanaga, the other Japanese starting pitcher who I think is good, but not a 1-2. And then a tier 3 for trade, I would put down Shane Bieber. We talked about Isaac Paredes from the from the Rays. But one guy that interests me is Ha-Sung Kim. He is on the Padres, and he's a guy that can play a lot of different positions, and he can play third. And I just think he would be a really interesting person to hit leadoff. Is that's what I'm looking for? Is there a really, who would be the leadoff for the Cubs this year? We I think we had Mike Tauchman doing it some, but I would like to see Ha-Sung Kim, a guy like that would be interesting. He wouldn't be the guy that would give you pop, but this is where I'm looking at these 3 tiers and trying to say to myself, okay, let's say you get Shohei, or let's say you get Pete Alonso, right? And then I would sit there and go, okay, Ha-Sung Kim batting 1, you got Nico batting 2, and then you got Pete Alonso batting 3, and then you could go Seiya or Ian 4-5, and it starts to kind of work itself out. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And then by the time you're done with that, you're looking at number 7, you're looking at, Dansby Swanson. So that's what I keep looking at, is I'm looking to me at one of these tier 1 guys and then putting together like 2 from the tier 2, tier 3 list. So if you were looking at this, Dustin, and you had the opportunity, I mean, there's a lot, you can see a lot of possibilities here, right?
Yeah, I do like the idea of like Jorge Soler. I don't mind that. And then put a couple of pitchers or a third baseman, like the top third baseman, Jorge Soler and Yamamoto. Like, I would rather spend $500 million that way, me personally. So Yamamoto, Chapman, and Jorge Soler.
Right.
I mean, like, to me, I would rather do that. That to me is better than Ohtani for me.
Right. And then what I'm going to do when this gets released is I'm going to put these tiers out here so people can kind of look at them and kind of, try to mix and match however they want. But like you said, there's things you can do that maybe, if you're starting pitching is stronger, then maybe, you don't miss Bellinger's offense as much. You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
Or, if you got better defense, I mean, Chapman is no slouch with the bat either. If you did get Cody Bellinger, but you also picked up, Yamamoto or Cease.
Yeah, Bellinger, Yamamoto. Okay. I could live with that. I could live with that.
And Rhys Hoskins,
I wouldn't be mad at everybody about if that happened.
And Rhys Hoskins is a guy that, when he came up, I remember when he first came up and I think I don't know if he debuted against the Cubs or it wasn't long after. I mean, he absolutely crushed. And I'm like, my God. But I think that there's a lot out there that if you don't get Shohei Ohtani, it's not the end of the world. But I do truly believe that the Cubs do need to then either get one of those other 5 names, Yamamoto, Snell, Soto, Cease, or Alonso. I think that changes the game. And I think that if the Cubs do that, get some of these guys in here, you have the pieces. The Cubs have so many like outfielders that they're just not going to use as far as, prospects. I think that now is the time to make a trade and you won't kill your system. But that's why I think that you have to go, you can put a couple of things together. You have to go the free agent route. You have to go to the trade route, and you have to get, I think, 3 players from this list that I have. And I'll put that out on the Fly the W and my social media on Twitter at Crawly's Cubs.
You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It is season 2. It's episode number 93. Are the Cubs desperate? Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. The Ford Frick announcements are coming out later this week, and it's a good time. There's never a bad time for Crawly to talk to Matt Spiegel, one half of the Parkins Spiegel Show, the afternoon drive show on 670 The Score.
Joining me now on the Fly the W podcast, you can hear him on the afternoon drive from 2 to 6 as one half of the Parkins Spiegel Show on 670 The Score. Matt Spiegel, how you doing, Matt?
Dude, I am well. Nice to be here with you, Crawly. Got me cozy after dark. Those are some Christmas lights in the background there in my son's room behind me, and I'm comfy, cozy, and looking forward to talking Cubs with you. What's happening?
The one thing I really wanted to talk about is with the winter meetings going on, and we're watching Ohtani Watch 2024, but the Baseball Hall of Fame will be announcing this week the Ford C. Frick Award for Excellence in Baseball Broadcasting. And over the last baseball season, Matt, you were the host of a podcast from Odyssey and 2400 Sports called PBP, Voices of Baseball, where you talked with numerous baseball broadcasters. What inspired you to create that broadcast?
It's the first thing I ever wanted to be when I was about 5 years old, sitting in the basement of my home in suburban New Jersey, listening to baseball on the radio as my big brother was listening to baseball on the radio at the time. And he was paying more attention to the baseball on the radio than he was to me. And I wanted him to be paying attention to me. And I was like, maybe one day if I'm the guy talking about baseball on the radio, then he and I will talk to each other. And at the same time, I was falling in love with the game. And I slowly realized what the radio baseball voice did, which was make it exist at all. Anything and everything. Nothing happens without you giving voice to it for the person who's listening to the game. It's a pretty remarkable power when you think about it, and a remarkable job where you facilitate that for people. So I just fell in love with it. And ever since, I've always listened to Pat Hughes primarily, of course, but also just like to great baseball radio voices. And I think it's a wonderful art and a fascinating way of expressing oneself as a satellite to the ball game itself. And because the ball game is the star, as it always is, but you're very close to the game itself. In my opinion, that's as close as you can get to the game without playing in the game or managing the game or coaching the game. As close as you can get is being that radio play-by-play voice and bringing it to people. So I just think it's a beautiful craft, and I've fallen in love with the craft. And that's really what the PBP was a love letter to the craft of play-by-play and ruminations on the relationship of the fans with the broadcast. And of course, along the way, all those interviews with folks who do it and have done it. And I'm thrilled to have done it. I'm really proud of the season that it was, and got a chance to talk to a ton of interesting people.
Now, one of the finalists for the Frick Award is Joe Buck. And of course, Joe Buck, did Cardinals games, the Fox Sports, and also the World Series, including the Cubs World Series. And, I think Joe Buck sometimes is a lightning rod. And I thought it was just such a fascinating episode because he talked about that national, and it's a topic that comes up throughout your podcast, but that national versus local call. And I thought Joe did such a great job of explaining the difference of a local broadcaster and a national broadcaster. What do you think you learned the most from Joe Buck, or what would people be most surprised about when they listen to your podcast about Joe Buck?
It's interesting. I think the world of Joe. He's become a friend, and I think he's like a really sweet and thoughtful guy. I wonder, I think for Cub fans, they might be surprised to know just how much he loved being a part of that run in 2016, how proud he is to have been a part of it. I think he wrote a column at the end of the World Series calling it the highlight of his career. But I had met him during that playoff run and hung out with him a couple of times during that playoff run. And he was just so excited because he's a baseball guy first. I know he's thought of as a Cardinals guy. And of course, I mean, imagine he was a little boy, a toddler crawling around the Cardinals radio booth as his dad, Jack Buck, was doing the games. I mean, that's pretty transformative and pretty powerful. But when it comes down to it, he loves baseball. He loves the whole thing. And he knew what a big deal it was in all of 2016. So for him, it was really powerful, and he was really excited and hoping it went well and went a certain way. But, it's also his job on the national level to make sure that both fan bases feel like they're represented. And as you're doing that as a national broadcaster, it can make both fan bases feel like they're being marginalized. So that's just kind of the way it goes. And there's a certain amount of hate that goes along with that. And Joe and I bonded originally about the hate because he's a people pleaser, like I am a people pleaser. And when you have to deal with a certain amount of hatred or dislike from listeners or from viewers or whatever, it takes you a moment to realize, oh, that might just be what people do, and people are going to go a certain direction, and you just have to try and stay as true to yourself as you can as a broadcaster. Just try and do what you do and be yourself. And if people like you, great. If they don't like you, okay, that's fine. So just kind of just try to be yourself. So that's how he and I bonded. And I know deep down, and I know for a fact how much he enjoyed being a part of that Cubs run in 2016.
I thought his especially his final out call was just phenomenal. Just, you heard the excitement in his voice as Brian picked up that ball. One thing in that episode that really stuck out to me is that he explained, on the local broadcast, when his dad was doing the Cardinals game, when there would be two guys on and no outs, he would say, Jack Buck, his dad would say, "We need a triple play here." And Joe went on to kind of describe, on the national, there is no we. It's a lot different than a local broadcast,
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Because you're just kind of talking about the way the game is, but this is the cruel fate of the national broadcaster on some level. And it's interesting because our guy now, Boog Shambi, has lived both of those realities now. And as he gets in deeper and deeper with the Cubs as a hometown broadcaster, I'm sure it's resonating with him on multiple levels because, with the local broadcaster, they carry us all the way through the season, all through the ups and downs of an actual season where there's so much emotion and so much of a roller coaster. And then they carry us all the way to the playoffs, and then poof, they're gone. And all of a sudden you're with these randoms. On some level, it's like, who are these people? And sometimes it's a new broadcaster trying it out, or it's a vintage guy like Bob Costas, who's all of a sudden working for TBS. And you're like, wait a minute, Costas was an NBC guy. And then, is he more of a New York guy? Is he a national guy? And you're trying to kind of wrap your head around the whole thing as you are still emotionally engaged as you were all season long as a fan of your local. So it's a crazy dichotomy, isn't it? It's a dichotomy for the fan to experience as much as it is for the broadcaster if you're actually really in tune with the thing.
Absolutely. Now, the 2024 Frick Award ballot was created by a subcommittee of the voting electorate that included past Frick honorees Marty Brenneman, Bob Costas, and Pat Hughes, and broadcast historians David J. Halbstrom and Kurt Smith. You had three of those on the subcommittee on your podcast. You had Marty, you had Bob Costas, and Pat Hughes.
Yeah. And let me interrupt you for a second. And Kurt Smith is the living dean of broadcast or broadcaster journalism, I would say. He wrote a book called Voices of the Game, which I was given when I was a senior in high school by my drama teacher, because I was a theater kid, Crawly, but she knew I was a baseball guy. So she gave me that book, Voices of the Game by Kurt Smith, and it traces the history of baseball broadcasting. So, I mean, that's some incredible royalty, everybody involved, what you just said.
And you know, yeah. And so when I'm listening to the Bob Costas interview, you just kind of talked about this. I thought he just did such a great job of breaking down the art of broadcasting. And when he brought up the idea about baseball being a local game and wondering why the postseason doesn't have like a Manning cast, like a simulcast where you could have your local broadcasters. If you're from Chicago and if you're a national person, you could turn into a Bob Costas. And I'm just thinking to myself, I wonder if MLB ever listens to a guy like Bob Costas, because just so many good ideas, so brilliant about the art of broadcasting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And as long as it didn't split the ratings, as long as it was just maybe a secondary audio cast, or I suppose like the Manning cast, or like they do for the college football playoff and have those alternate broadcasts, as long as it didn't split the ratings or whatever, it's really a no-brainer. I suppose local radio does that, though. We very often see some of the TV broadcasters for a local team slip over to the radio side. I'll never forget in 2016, as I was covering that World Series for 670 The Score and really covering the whole playoffs, Len Casper, who was the TV voice at the time, was just a happy and eager participant in the radio broadcast. So Pat Hughes and Ron Coomer doing the game, but Len was around, and I would see Len during games as I was on press row. And then Len would go down on the field and interview players after the game, go into the locker room, go into the clubhouse and interview players after the game, and just kind of be around pregame. So sometimes the TV person will step over it. If the TV person's a big enough name or a big enough presence, maybe they'll take over from the radio person. So I guess it exists in that way, if you can time it out using multiple apps on your phone.
And I also remember Steve Stone was in the radio booth with Pat Hughes when they were in 2003, when the whole Game 6 with the Bartman ball incident happened, and
Wow.
Stoney was calling it. And I remember that, I heard it later because I was at the game, but it's like, oh, there's Stoney in the in the radio booth. But
that's amazing. I wasn't at Game 6, but I was at Game 7. And it's one of the more memorable moments of my baseball attendance, really, anywhere across the boards, as press or as fan or whatever. I was in the right field bleachers, and when Kerry Wood homered to retake the lead, the entire bleachers, like everybody just thought, well, all right, there it is. If the pitcher's homering to retake the lead, that means the Cubs are going to win Game 7.
My season tickets are in the upper deck and the whole thing's shaking. And I'm like, well, if I'm going down, this is the way I want to go, I guess. But when listening to Costas, I mean, I think the thing that resonates for so many Cub fans, June 23rd, 1984, the Sandberg game. And you did such a great job talking to him about what, was that your breakout moment? And
yeah,
I think that, he made me laugh because he says when he visits Chicago, people still yell out the window, the Sandberg game. And that to me was the first call I ever remember as a kid. Like if you're telling me what's the first baseball call you remember, that's it right there, was the Sandberg game. I 100% remember that. I was an 8-year-old kid, and it was just such a great call by Bob.
Wow, that's interesting. So the whole game, you remember the feeling of listening to the broadcaster doing the thing.
Oh yeah,
that's really cool for me. That's right there. And then the Jack Morris no-hitter, is that 84? Also a game of the week on NBC. Jack Morris no-hitter. But yeah, certainly those kind of moments are just indelible and kind of lock in the fact, and sometimes you don't even think about that person. Like, who is that person bringing you the game? And then later on, you start thinking about it. It's interesting, on the Veterans Committee for the Hall of Fame, for this particular ballot, the one that named Jim Leland into the Hall of Fame, and Lou Piniella was one vote away. Lou, just one. I know, right?
2 years, vote away. 2 years in a row, right?
I think you're right. I think you're right. But another guy on the ballot there was Bill White. And Bill White was a really good player, and eventually towards the end of his career, a really good executive, a president of the National League, I believe, under the commissioner. But in between that, He was a voice of the Yankees. He and Phil Rizzuto were the voices of the Yankees on WPIX TV. And I grew up thinking that Bill White was just a broadcaster, but all these people in the game, you talk about Steve Stone. Steve Stone played for the Cubs and the Sox, won a Cy Young for the Orioles, played for the Giants as well as going to Kent State with his friend Thurman Munson at the time. But like all these people had entire lives in baseball and just sort of found their way to the booth and made an impact on you and on me just by sort of the timing of their presence in the booth. But it's interesting to think of them as just lives in and around baseball the entire time.
Well, this is a true story. I want to say it's 2019, and Bob Costas is calling the Cubs game. It was, I want to say it was against the Dodgers. The Cubs win at 7-2, and I had a few drinks, and I'm running around all the haunts in Wrigleyville, and I go to this one particular place, and who do I see out of my eye? I see Bob Costas. There he is, right across the bar, like in this kind of little hideaway bar type place. And I see Bob, and I just turn into that 8-year-old kid again. And I'm like, do I say anything? Do I go up to him? He's having a drink, cocktail, and I've had plenty of cocktails myself. So I'm like, I'm going to go up and say something. So I said, Mr. Costas, the Sandberg game, that was such a great call. I remember that. I'm like, do you mind if I get a picture with you? He said, oh, sure. No, go ahead. So I give my camera to this guy that's scowling at me. He's scowling at me, right? Here's the picture of me and Bob Costas.
It's a good one.
The guy taking the photo was John Smoltz. I was so hyper focused on Bob Costas. I didn't even take a look at who the other guy was. I just was like, Costas, the Sandberg game. So,
that's traumatic. Crawly, that sounds like you. You're very focused on the moment. You got very excited to get that picture with Costas.
and the Hall of Famers taking the photo. But they're both Hall of Famers, so all good. But
phenomenal.
Every Cub fan has to listen to the one you did with Pat Hughes, because Pat Hughes, I mean, it reminds me of that Vin Scully where he's reading the grocery list. Like I can have Pat Hughes read anything and just absolutely sit there and just listen and enjoy it.
Yes.
Last year's Ford Frick Award recipient and play-by-play voice for the Cubs, Pat talked about advice he received from Ernie Harwell, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck kind of like raise up there. He said, a good announcer should have the reflexes of an athlete, an impartiality of an umpire, the enthusiasm of a fan, and a background knowledge of a writer. And I just thought to myself, is there any better description of what you want a good broadcaster to be? I mean, absolutely just perfection right there.
I love that you grabbed that and remembered that. And the thing about this is, and you'll know this, Crawly, but I wonder if some of the listeners do. About 3 years ago, I got the chance to do pregame and postgame and the fifth inning, one inning. And here I was at 50, getting a chance to do an inning of play-by-play. And I was so excited, but so nervous. A broadcaster my whole life, and a lover of baseball and a lover of play-by-play, but had never done it. It's a very weird way in. So I asked every broadcaster that I got a chance to interact with for some advice. And Len Casper is a good friend, gave me great advice. Joe Buck is a friend, gave me great advice. Jason Benetti gave me advice. And Pat Hughes, who I had known for a long time at that point, gave me that bit of advice. So before I got it from him on the broadcast, he gave it to me 4 years ago. And it was incredibly impactful. And I saved it. And all those little bits of advice that I got from people, I've kind of kept assembled through the years, and I've put it together and thought about it. So no, that's a perfect description. And Ernie Harwell is one of the OGs all time of the thing. Had a huge impact on Len, huge impact on Pat. And I'd say Ernie and Vin are, maybe Mel Allen are right there. Bob Prince is a name that comes up an awful lot. Marty Brenneman grew up listening to Bob Prince. So did Costas, So there's certain people's perspectives. And I think what you just said, Ernie Harwell put it all together in a really, really nice, compact way, which made a big impact on me and a big impact on Pat before that, obviously.
And one of the fun things that you do in the podcast is you ask these announcers, is there any kind of ritual or any way of doing things? And Joe Buck cracked me up because my grandfather used to have that the pen with the 4 different colors that Joe uses.
Oh yeah.
but I loved Pat's description of how he did things. And so I kind of looked in my memorabilia collection and I pulled out this World Series scorecard, and Pat was talking about how the Cubs are always in blue and the Cardinals are in red. And so you can get this from Pat Hughes's website, these scorecards. And it's just phenomenal to take a look at all the notes and stuff that he kind of just writes down here. And how it just all comes together. And you talk a lot about in the podcast, how focused you have to be, how in the moment, the mindfulness of being a broadcaster. And you actually had a chance to broadcast games when Pat Hughes was in Cooperstown. Coomer was gone and Pat Hughes and Zach Zaidman. And so I think, what did you say? You just wanted to make sure you didn't burn the house down?
I wanted to make sure I did not burn the house down. That was what I said in advance. And then when the time came, Crawly, and let's not forget, I broadcast the 3-game sweep of the Cardinals at Wrigley on the weekend of July 23rd. That were the first 3 wins of the 8-game win streak that convinced Jed Hoyer to buy. So, and that 8-game win streak culminated because there was White Sox in there, and then the Talkman catch in St. Louis, all part of the same streak that I and Elise Menaker started, and Mike Esposito. The 3 of us got that going, and you're welcome. You're welcome, America. You're welcome, Cubdom. Although they didn't make the playoffs, perhaps you recall. And if they lose Cody Bellinger for nothing, you can also blame us.
Well, you know what? It was fun watching him go for it. I'd rather, try to win than, I thought,
yeah.
I appreciate your efforts in there, but you call it the perch. I mean, I've been up in the press box, just kind of looking out there. And it's so weird because if you just, if you're just normally in Wrigley Field, when you're in the press box, you actually see Lake Michigan. It's just such a beautiful sight.
Yeah.
But I mean, that first time that you're calling a game on your own, I mean, there had to have been butterflies.
There were butterflies for months and months leading up to it, and weeks and days, and then hours. Although once I got to the chair and you sit there, it's such a special place to watch the ballpark come alive slowly. There's really nothing like it. You get there and it feels like you're alone in the ballpark, and you see the grounds crew doing their thing and see the vendors slowly show up, and then a few tours walking around the empty stadium, and then progressively the teams working out, and eventually the fans once the gate opens and everything. And by the time first pitch comes, you are locked and loaded. You've had a good 3 hours just sitting there, in addition to whatever other prep you've done, where you're getting all your ducks in a row and filling out your scorecard and getting everything ready. I was ready for first pitch, and that was exciting to feel ready. It is an incredibly mindful exercise, and you turn off the phone. How many things in life do we have now where we actually turn off the phone for 4 hours? It's pretty rare and pretty special in and of itself to do that. But I know I should have been more nervous than I was, but maybe it's a life of loving the game that led me to just try and, okay, let's just be here and be part of the thing and do the very best you can. Really, really special opportunity.
Well, I think, also your background as a musician, you mentioned it in the podcast, being like a jazz musician sometimes. And sometimes if you make a mistake, lean into it. And just go with it,
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. Because everybody makes mistakes. Players make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So if I make one, just, go ahead and let's laugh at it. Let's move on and not make another mistake within the next 5 seconds or the next 10 seconds.
Now, you talked about guys you got advice from and your friends in the broadcasting community. This is a picture before when Len was still with the Cubs and Jason Benetti was with the Sox. I saw him outside. I think they were coming to talk to you at the Cubs at the 670 booth right there. And I was like, oh my God. And, Len shocked a lot of people by going to the South Side, but like you, a lover of radio, correct?
100%. He made a personal happiness choice to be a radio broadcaster and to live that. Len grew up in suburban Detroit and grew up on Ernie Harwell and wanted to be that. And also the thing we talked about earlier, where once the postseason comes, you go away as a TV broadcaster, you're gone. I remember Len is the guy I told you was hanging around the Cubs radio broadcast during the 2016 run. And, if the White Sox are ever going to get back to the postseason, and it could be a little while, but if the White Sox are ever going to get back to the postseason, Len will be there, and he'll get to be there every step of the way. Get to call World Series games, theoretically, for the team you're the broadcaster for. That was never going to happen for him as a television Cubs person. So yeah, it's he made a difficult choice, but I know he's happy as a clam, and that's what matters.
Now I got to tell you, as shocking as it was when Len left, it's also shocking that Benetti's now going to Detroit. I mean with Jason, you just see like a rising star. He's great. He just has that it factor. It's hard to even describe. And I think that's just such a loss for Chicago, because that booth with Benetti and Stone was just a really, really good broadcast.
Yeah, just a remarkable broadcast. Jason's one of my favorite people, not just in the business, but just in general. Just a huge brain, a massive amount of artistic references and cultural references that are all existing within him there. And he keeps it calm and steady as he broadcasts along the way. Just a very thoughtful and wonderful guy. And it's a damn shame that he had to make a choice to leave his hometown team. It's crazy when I really stop and think about it.
I think about probably some of the funniest broadcast games ever called. I think about, when Bill Murray substituted for Harry Carey when Harry had his stroke, and that was just classic. But I'm going to put this right up there as Jason Benetti and Bill Walton. I mean, was there anything ever more ridiculous than that? And
No.
It was classic.
Well, it's perfect. Benetti's exactly the right guy, because he can keep the game going and keep the whole thing happening, but he can exist with Bill on every level. And I don't know how many psychedelic drugs Jason has done. I'm not sure. I haven't asked him about that. But we know Bill has done some. But Jason can hang with all those levels of thought that Bill had going, and that was really special stuff. I hope they do some more of that on NBA TV.
That was brilliant. Now, with this,
oh, you're talking about, well, that's right, because Walton came and did baseball games on the White Sox. So yeah, they did that, of course, but Walton had also done basketball with Benetti on NBA TV for a little while.
I mean, that just such an odd couple, but so fun to listen to. Do you think that, I know that, it's done for the season, but do you think there's a possibility that you're going to do maybe some more episodes? I mean, we didn't hear from Len, or maybe like, Bob Uecker or something like that. There's just so many great broadcasters. Do you think that this chapter is closed, or do you think that maybe it might come back at one point in time?
Crawly, it's possible that it comes back, but I'll tell you, I'm writing a book about it. I learned so much and grabbed so much incredible advice, and it all happened in a year where I got to do my first few games in full, like you're talking about. So I'm putting together a book about it as we speak, so I can stay in that mindset and just keep swimming in all of the thoughts that came along with it. And I hope folks will be interested, and it'll have a lot of the advice that I got from all those people along the way. So, Kurt Smith hasn't written a book about broadcasting in a long time. Somebody's got to pick up that mantle, right?
I can't wait.
Might as well be me.
I can't wait to read that. Just want to ask you really quick, going into the winter meetings, we were talking about, Dustin and I were talking earlier, Bob Nightingale was joking around, Ohtani or bust, yelling from the Chicago rooftops. I mean, there's a lot of options for the Cubs there still. It doesn't have to be Ohtani or bust. I think there's a lot Jed can do, either with trade chips or with the money available both this year and next year, to really, make the Cubs competitive in 2024. What do you kind of anticipate happening? I know it's hard to predict at this point in time.
Well, it appears that mostly the entire industry is waiting for the Ohtani domino to fall before a lot of other things fall into place. So I think that is inherently a good thing for the teams that are chasing Ohtani. And as we are broadcasting here, you and I, we know that Jed is not in Nashville for the winter meetings. We also know that that some other GMs are not there at the winter meeting, which lends a lot of credence to this idea that there are meetings going on in Los Angeles with Ohtani and his representatives at this point. So maybe we'll get news very shortly. But I think what's important is that any team that misses out in the Ohtani sweepstakes is prepared to move quickly on plan B. And that's why these front offices are vast, and it's not just one person trying to keep tabs of everything. So yeah, there's lots of options. If Ohtani does not happen, then the Cubs, they may be moving quickly on a pitcher anyway. as we're talking about this. My colleague Bruce Levine reporting that Tyler Glasnow is very possible to be a trade acquisition, 1 year at $25 million for a front of the rotation quality starter when healthy is totally workable. So, you may have something like that since Ohtani's not going to pitch this year. Maybe the Cubs are actively chasing that, but they just need to be ready to pounce on the rest of the market should the Ohtani thing not happen. And I think they will. And all of this, it comes with the backdrop of Cody Bellinger will come back to the Cubs and give them a chance. He had such a good time here and was so happy here that he will explore the market, but knowing he and Scott Boras, they'll probably wait until February to sign, maybe January. But Bellinger, I think, will come back to the Cubs and give them a chance to get involved, and we'll see what happens by then.
That would be great. And you did kind of pop some balloons today, letting everybody know that if you sign Ohtani, that doesn't mean Marquee will be selling a lot of subscriptions in Japan. Not going to happen.
I thought that was important to report the details on that, because I was among many wondering what kind of financial boon that could be for a team like the Cubs that has their own direct-to-consumer product that they could theoretically sell to people all around the world and potentially millions of Japanese. But no, international streaming rights being what they are as part of MLB TV, that's what Japanese fans would have to buy and maybe already own, and will just auto resubscribe after they watched Angels games that way. So that in itself is not a specific Cubs revenue stream waiting to happen to mitigate Ohtani expense. But there are other ways. There are other ways that you can market and monetize the international presence that Ohtani would bring.
Absolutely. Like Ohtani at Wrigley Field. I just keep thinking about home runs going down Kenmore. The Ball Hawks are going to have an absolute blast. Matt, I appreciate you jumping on here. And again, if our listeners are interested, the PBP Voices of the Game is on the Odyssey app or wherever you stream podcasts. Matt, why don't you tell people again, 2 to 6 Parkins and Spiegel Show on the Score. Where can they follow you on the socials to get more information from you?
Matt Spiegel 670 on Twitter. You can find me there. And yes, 670 The Score is where you find Parkins and Spiegel in the afternoons, and grab that podcast. I appreciate how much you listen to it, Crawly, and the great questions. And I thank you for sharing the passion of it. It was an absolute labor of love. And as I mentioned, hopefully a book will come out of it. So the PBP, like play by play. So the PBP, you can search for that on any of your podcast platforms.
And we'll link it up as well. Matt, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure I'm going to be seeing you at CubsCon.
You bet it. You bet it. Thanks, Crawly.
This is episode 93 of season 2 of the Fly the W670 podcast. Are the Cubs desperate? Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. All right, Crawly, let's talk about some of the rumors and some of the other news around the winter meetings.
Well, Dustin, they have gotten underway, and there's a lot going on. First off, on Sunday night, the Hall of Fame Contemporary Era Committee was looking at managers, umpires, and front office people to see who would be, if anyone, would be the first member of the Hall of Fame class of 2024. And only one of the 8 finalists got the necessary 75% to get elected. Jim Leyland, former manager of the Pirates and the Marlins and the Rockies and the Tigers and Team USA. But Dustin, how heartbreaking for our buddy, sweet Lou Piniella, a guy who for the second year in the row fell one vote short.
Terrible. I mean, you feel bad for him, right? When it's that close, one measly vote. But, right, there's always next time around.
Yeah, but, you just get nervous. So,
we can't get any worse, right? His Hall of Fame, unless he does something stupid off the field, right? His Hall of Fame credentials are not going to get worse. The problem is who's next, like who's coming in from behind that potentially could, be on that ballot and get in the way.
So on Saturday, that was the anniversary of Ron Santos' death 13 years ago.
I saw your Saturday. Twitter post, yeah.
I mean, all Cub fans loved Ronnie. I used to kind of sneak in when I would go to the game and get there early for the bobbleheads or whatever giveaways, whatever tchotchkes. I would run up and I would wait up by the ramp, like sit in that last row underneath the press box. And I could hear when the golf cart was coming with Ronnie, and I would pop up, hey, Ronnie, and just like kind of just talk to him. And I think about it now, I was probably talking a million miles a minute, but he was my dad's hero growing up. My dad loved that team, that 69 team in Santo. And, me being a Cub fan and being, really listening on the radio, I'm really a radio guy. It was just such a thing for me. And so, here's the thing is that, yes, Lou Piniella can give it another shot, give it another crack, but these guys are getting older, Dustin.
I hear what you're saying. Right.
The worst thing is,
you want to make sure he's there to enjoy it and celebrate it with his friends and family as well.
Right. My dad and I did go to Cooperstown when Ronnie got inducted in the Hall of Fame because we felt that we wanted to represent Cub fans and be there for the Santo family. It's cool. Just like I said, just what are you doing? And one vote. You knew it last year, so why don't we all just vote for him this year? I don't understand what the big deal is, but okay. The draft lottery, the 2024 MLB draft order will be determined via baseball's second draft lottery. You remember after all the mess and all the lockout and all that stuff, the new CBA, they want to try to eliminate tanking. So just because you finish with the worst record does not necessarily mean you get the first pick in the draft. Okay. So all of the past season's non-playoff teams are entered in a lottery balls similar to, I think, NBA, right? They're all going to be entered for the top 6 picks in the draft with the odds weighted in reverse order of the standings. So that means that the A's, the Royals, and the Rockies have the highest odds of earning the top pick in the draft. They have an 18.3% chance. Dustin, for the Cubs, it's not looking good. They were, like I said, until the last weekend, they were in the playoff picture. Their odds of landing the number 1 pick are at 0.4%. And so after the first 6 picks are determined by the lottery, the remaining non-playoff teams are assigned picks based on their 2023 records. That draft lottery takes place at 2:30 p.m. Central on Tuesday, tomorrow, when this podcast gets released. And the results are going to be broadcast at 4:30 p.m. Central time. So, it's
happened before. It's happened before. Stranger things have happened before in these draft lotteries.
Yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed, but what you're hoping for more than anything, Dustin, is that this is the last time that you're going to have a good draft pick. This is, once you get in the postseason,
yep.
You don't get those great draft picks anymore. On Wednesday, Dustin, is what I want a lot of our listeners to really be focusing on. If you've been listening to Fly the W podcast, we've talked to so many of the minor league broadcasters and minor league players and guys like, Lance Brosdowski and Jim Callis about the Cubs farm system. The Rule 5 draft on Wednesday, and that's for players who are already on a team but aren't on the 40-man rosters. Okay, so teams without a full 40-man roster spot, if they're under 40, they're able to choose a player from other teams. And so remember at the end of November, the Cubs had to decide who to protect, put on the 40-man roster so another team wouldn't poach them. And so the Cubs added Porter Hodge, Michael Arias, and lefty Bailey Horn to the 40-man roster to protect them in the draft. Arias and Hodge are top 30 prospects, so that's not a surprise. But 2 of the top 30 prospects that the Cubs have left exposed are starters Cole Franklin and catcher Pablo Aliendo. Cole was on the show. So was Porter Hodge, actually. But those are guys to kind of watch in this Rule 5 draft. It doesn't mean they're going to happen. So in the Rule 5 draft, teams draft in reverse order of the standings from the previous season. There's no lotto balls or anything. So the worst teams go first. And so they are able to choose a player, and then they must send $100,000 to that player's team, which is, peanuts in baseball terms. But they have to keep that player on their 26-man roster for the entire season. So you have to make this guy, if you select somebody, they can't go to the minors. They can't go to Iowa, so to speak, or something like that. They have to be on the MLB roster all year. And so you wonder, how many teams, like if you're the Dodgers, you can't spare a 26-man roster spot. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If you're a team that's maybe not as good, like say a Washington National, what does it hurt you to do that? But if you are not on the 26-man roster for the entire season, the player has to be offered back to the original team at half the price. So let's say Cole Franklin gets chosen by Washington, right? The Cubs would then get $100,000 in compensation. But if the Nationals don't keep him on their 26-man roster, then the Cubs get the first dibs, and they would have to pay $50,000 to get him back. So, some people may say, well, with the Rule 5 draft, not every player left off a 40-man roster can be selected. So like a James Triantos, who had a great AFL, he can't. To be eligible, you have to fall into one of two categories. You have to be signed at age 19 or older and played in professional baseball for at least 4 years, or signed at 18 or younger and played for at least 5 years. So the Cubs' #1 draft pick, Matt Shaw, you don't have to worry about losing him to the Rule draft because he just started playing his professional career. So you got time with that. But for other guys that have been in the system for a little bit, those are the guys that you tend to possibly lose. So just something to keep an eye on. And that's going to be coming up, like I said, on Wednesday. So we'll have the news on all of that when we get back. The other thing is that the Cubs don't have to pick someone if they don't want to. They'll have the option to select a player with the 17th pick in the Rule 5 draft. Dustin, a couple other nuggets. South Korean center fielder Jung-Hoo Lee, who's a former KBO MVP, was posted. You don't hear a lot as much about the Korean players being posted as much as the Japanese players. But according to Odyssey Insider and 670 The Score contributor John Heyman, the Padres, the Giants, and the Yankees are among the teams that are interested. And so, especially with the Giants and Yankees, you've heard them tied to Bellinger a lot. And so you wonder, would those teams, the Giants and the Yankees, prefer Lee over Bellinger or vice versa? Some of the reports coming out is that Bellinger's asking for close to $200 million. And I think that the Yankees are kind of balking at that price right now.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, I don't know if I'd want the Cubs to pay him $200 million either.
Right. And before we jumped on air, Jesse Rogers reports that former Cubs pitcher Wade Miley signed a 1-year deal with a base salary of $7 million and a mutual option for 2025 for $12 million with the Milwaukee Brewers. He played there last year, but if you've been watching, he was with the Cubs the year before last in the 2022 season and even in the 2023 season. To me, Dustin, it seems like his best days are behind him and that injuries are a situation. So I don't know how much I would be too worried about Wade Miley and the Milwaukee Brewers.
I'm not worried about that at all. No, that's fine. Good for Wade. I'm glad he's getting, that big pro money still, but the Cubs will feast on his pitching. That's for sure. Well, Crawly, that's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the socials, Fly the W on Facebook, Instagram. Of course, we're on Twitter. You can email Crawly and I, flythew670gmail.com, and you can watch us on YouTube by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. Crawly, we're going to stay in touch on the text machine because hopefully we'll have a reason to jump in with an emergency podcast.
We'll absolutely be ready when that cold stove turns hot. Thanks for everybody who purchased tickets for the Club 400 Christmas party. It is sold out. I warned y'all. So hopefully if you got tickets, you're going to be there. We're going to have a lot of fun. We'll sing, we'll drink, and we'll cheer. Go Cubs. Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!